HOAs love to micromanage everything, but when Karen decided she could control the sun, she messed with the wrong homeowner. I installed solar panels to cut my energy bills and help the environment, but Karen, our power-hungry HOA president, decided they were an eyesore that didn't fit the community aesthetic. She slapped me with thousands of dollars in fines and threatened legal action if I didn't rip them off my roof. But instead of backing down, I found a legal loophole that Karen never saw coming. Keep watching to find out how I turned the tables on Karen. Speaking of Karens, if you want more stories about crazy HOA Karens, remember to like this video and to subscribe to our channel. Moving into Maplewood Ridge seemed like a dream at first. The houses were beautiful, the neighbors were friendly, and everything looked well maintained. The HOA was supposed to keep the neighborhood nice, but I quickly learned that our HOA president, Karen, took that to a whole new level of insanity. Karen treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She fined people over minor paint color variations, banned holiday decorations, and even tried to regulate how long you could have your garage door open. At first, I kept my head down and avoided trouble. But then I decided to install solar panels. It was a no-brainer, energy prices were skyrocketing, and solar would slash my bills while reducing my carbon footprint. I went through all the proper channels, permits, city inspections, everything. But the second the panels went up, I got my first HOA violation notice. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have installed unsanctioned exterior modifications that do not align with the Maplewood Ridge community aesthetic. As per HOA guidelines, all roofing modifications must be pre-approved by the HOA board. Your solar panels must be removed within 14 days to avoid further penalties. I blinked at the letter, completely dumbfounded. There was nothing in the HOA bylaws that banned solar panels. And yet, Karen had signed the letter herself, acting as if this was an official ruling. I decided to call her bluff. I emailed the HOA, attaching a copy of my city permits and politely informing them that my solar panels were 100% legal and that I wouldn't be removing them. Karen responded within 2 hours. Your panels are an unacceptable visual obstruction. If you do not comply, you will be fined $250 per day until they are removed. Now she was just making up rules. I wasn't about to let her bully me, so I refused to pay. The next week, I got another letter, this time claiming my unpaid fines had reached $2,500, and if I didn't pay, they'd take me to HOA arbitration. That's when I knew this was going to be a war. So I did my homework. And that's when I found the perfect loophole. A little-known state law explicitly protected homeowners' rights to install solar panels, overriding any HOA restrictions. If an HOA tried to enforce a rule against them, the homeowner could sue and win damages. I decided to have some fun with this. I drafted a formal letter citing the law and warning that if the HOA continued to harass me, I would be filing a lawsuit. I even CC'd my lawyer cousin, making sure Karen saw his firm's letterhead. I printed copies and delivered one to every house in the neighborhood. The next HOA meeting was absolute chaos. Neighbors were furious. Some had been wanting solar panels but were too afraid of Karen's petty fines. Others had their own horror stories of Karen overstepping her authority. Karen, red-faced and furious, tried to talk over everyone, insisting that the fines would stand, until one neighbor pulled up the law on their phone and read it out loud. She had no legal ground to stand on. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down, and that's when I decided to get my revenge. I knew that the HOA office building was on our community's shared electrical grid, the same electrical grid that my solar panels were now feeding power into. So I made a few strategic adjustments to my system. By the time I was done, Karen's HOA office was running entirely on the neighborhood grid, while my house ran independently on solar backup. Then I waited. The next month, a power outage hit the neighborhood. And while my house was running perfectly fine, the HOA office went completely dark. No computers, no Wi-Fi, no AC, nothing. Karen was forced to hold the next HOA meeting by candlelight, and I made sure to record every moment. The moment Karen stormed away after our little street confrontation, I knew this was far from over. She wasn't just angry, she was humiliated. I could practically hear the gears turning in her power-hungry brain as she tried to figure out how to regain control. I wasn't surprised when, the next morning, I woke up to another violation notice taped to my door. This one was even more ridiculous than the first. Dear homeowner, Due to your refusal to comply with HOA guidelines, your solar panels remain a serious violation. Effective immediately, you are being fined $500 per day until they are removed. If the fines are not paid, the HOA will pursue legal action to place a lien on your home. My jaw clenched. A lien? She was trying to weaponize the HOA's legal power against me because she lost an argument. I wasn't having it. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. A receptionist answered. Maplewood Ridge, oh, how may I? I need to speak to Karen. She's unavailable. Yeah, right. Then tell her I'm filing a formal dispute, and if she wants to continue harassing me, she can do it in front of a judge. The receptionist hesitated before finally saying, I'll pass the message along. I hung up and took a deep breath. It was time to escalate. I spent the next few hours gathering ammunition. I printed out the state law protecting homeowners' rights to install solar panels. I reviewed the HOA's own bylaws. Nowhere did it say solar panels were banned. I contacted a real estate lawyer, my cousin conveniently, and asked how hard it would be to countersue if Karen tried to file a lien. His answer? Not hard at all. By noon, I was fully armed. And just in time, because my neighbor Mark stopped by with news. You're not going to believe this, he said, stepping onto my porch. I raised an eyebrow. What now? She's trying to get the board to vote on an emergency amendment. That got my attention. What kind of amendment? One that officially bans solar panels, retroactive to last month. That way, she can claim your installation was illegal. I let out a low whistle. Wow, I said. She really doesn't give up, huh? Mark shook his head. She's losing it, man. She's desperate to prove she still runs the show. That's when I got an idea. If Karen wanted to fight dirty, I was about to show her I played dirtier. I knew the HOA meeting was happening that evening, and I planned to attend. But first, I made sure I had the ultimate backup plan. I printed copies of the state law protecting solar panels. I gathered signatures from neighbors who supported me, and I dug up an old email, one where Karen herself approved a resident's request for a solar-powered garden light. If she had allowed solar before, she couldn't suddenly claim it was banned. She had just trapped herself in her own hypocrisy. At 6 p.m., I walked into the HOA meeting, smiling. Because tonight, Karen was about to have a very bad time. I walked into the HOA meeting room, and the tension was palpable. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, murmuring among themselves. At the front of the room, Karen sat stone-faced, her lips pursed in a smug, self-satisfied expression. She had a stack of documents in front of her, no doubt filled with whatever nonsense she had cooked up to justify her illegal ban on solar panels. I took a seat near the front, making sure she could see me. Greg, the HOA's vice president, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. We have a full agenda tonight, but first, we'll discuss the emergency proposal brought forth by President Karen regarding solar panel regulations. Karen sat up straighter, eyes gleaming as she clutched her papers like they were a scepter of absolute authority. The proposal, Greg continued, seeks to officially prohibit solar panel installations that are deemed visually disruptive to the community aesthetic. If approved, any existing panels must be removed within 60 days. A few people in the crowd gasped. Some started whispering to each other. Karen stood, smoothing her blouse. As you all know, it is my duty to maintain the visual harmony of our neighborhood, she said, voice dripping with fake professionalism. Allowing these garish panels to remain would set a dangerous precedent. If we do not act now, soon our beautiful community will resemble a patchwork of mismatched panels and cluttered rooftops. I nearly laughed. She was acting like I had covered my roof in giant neon billboards. She continued, to ensure fairness, I have also outlined a fine system for noncompliance, which would allow us to enforce this policy efficiently. Greg shifted uncomfortably. How much are these fines exactly? Karen didn't miss a beat. $500 per week for non-removal. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Even some of Karen's usual supporters looked unsure. I stood up. Karen, I said, can you point to the section in the HOA bylaws that bans solar panels? Her eyes narrowed. The bylaws state that all external modifications must be approved by the HOA board. Since I did not approve your solar panels. You're not the entire board, I interrupted. And this proposal wouldn't even exist if I hadn't installed mine. She glared daggers at me. That's not the point. The HOA has the right to enforce community standards, not when it violates state law. I pulled out the printed law documents and held them up for everyone to see. According to state law, HOA restrictions cannot override homeowners' rights to install renewable energy sources, including solar panels. If you enforce this policy, you're breaking the law. Karen's face twitched. That. Greg took the paper from my hand and skimmed it. His brows furrowed. Karen, did you look into this before drafting your proposal? She snatched the paper from him, scanning it quickly. This isn't relevant. Our HOA has specific needs that supersede generic state laws. Greg cut her off. Karen, this law directly applies to us. If we vote to enforce this rule, we could face a lawsuit. The room erupted. You mean she was trying to fine people for something illegal? One neighbor asked. She just wants to control everything, another muttered. Karen's face reddened, but she wasn't done. This is my neighborhood. I won't let it become an eyesore. I smiled. Then maybe you should start by looking in the mirror. Karen was seething. Greg held up his hand, silencing the room. We need to vote. All in favor of Karen's proposal. 2 hands went up. Karen's, and some guy in the back who clearly didn't know what was going on. Everyone else? Against. Greg sighed. Proposal rejected. I grinned. That means my panels stay. Karen looked like she was about to explode. And that's when I decided to end her reign for good. I turned to the crowd. Since we're voting, I said, I'd like to propose something new, a recall vote to remove Karen as HOA president. The entire room went dead silent. Then cheering. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but for once in her life, she had nothing to say. Greg hesitated. We need to schedule. Linda, another board member, shook her head. No, we can vote right now. Karen tried to regain control. This is absurd. I have done nothing but serve this community. I folded my arms. Then let's see if the community agrees. Greg took a deep breath. All in favor of removing Karen as HOA president? Hands shot up. Half the room. Then more. Then almost everyone. Karen's hands clenched into fists. She turned to her last supporter, the guy in the back. Vote against, she hissed. He hesitated. Then slowly he raised his hand in favor of removal. Karen stared in horror. Greg nodded. The recall passes. Effective immediately, Karen is no longer HOA president. The room erupted again. Karen stood there, frozen, her face cycling between shock, rage, and disbelief. This isn't over, she finally spat. Then she grabbed her stack of papers, shoved them into her purse, and stormed out of the room. And just like that, the reign of HOA Karen was over. I exhaled, finally letting myself relax. But what I didn't know, Karen wasn't leaving quietly, and her final act of revenge would be worse than anything she'd done before. The neighborhood should have been celebrating. After years of micromanagement, fines, and ridiculous rules, Karen was finally gone. The HOA meeting had ended with cheers, high fives, and even some neighbors popping open champagne. But I knew Karen wasn't the type to go down without a fight. And I was right. The very next morning, I woke up to a notice taped to my front door. But it wasn't from the HOA. It was from the city. It read, Notice of Violation. A report has been filed regarding unapproved construction and possible violations of local building codes concerning the installation of solar panels on this property. An inspection has been scheduled. I read it twice, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Then it hit me. Karen had gone above the HOA. She had reported me directly to the city, claiming my solar panels were illegally installed. I gritted my teeth. She was still trying to win. I grabbed my phone and called the number on the notice. A city inspector answered. I just got a violation notice for my solar panels, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But I have permits and everything was installed legally. The inspector sighed. Yeah, we gotten a lot of complaints about your property. My stomach tightened. From who? Can't disclose that, he said. But off the record, it's just one person. And they're very persistent. I clenched my jaw. Karen. He let out a knowing chuckle. Look, I have to do the inspection since it's been formally reported. But if everything checks out, you won't have any issues. I exhaled. Fine. When can you come? Later today, he said. Shouldn't take long. I hung up and immediately started preparing. I pulled out every permit, document, and approval form I had. I even dug up my installation receipts in case Karen tried to claim I used an unapproved contractor. By the time the inspector arrived, I was ready. He took one look at my paperwork and nodded. This is all in order, he said. No violations here. I crossed my arms. So, what happens now? Well, he said, whoever reported this was hoping to have you fined or forced to remove the panels. But since there's nothing wrong, I'll be closing the complaint. I smiled. Can I get that in writing? He chuckled. Sure thing. He signed a report, officially clearing me of any violations, and left. I immediately made copies and sent them to the entire HOA board. Karen's last-ditch effort had officially failed. I figured that would be the end of it. I figured Karen would finally give up. I was so wrong. Because that night, my security cameras caught her doing something far worse. That night, I was finally able to relax, or so I thought. The city had officially cleared me. My solar panels were untouchable, and Karen had been removed from power. There was nothing left she could do. At least, that's what I believed. Until my phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. Motion detected in driveway. I groggily reached for my phone and opened the security camera app. My half-asleep brain needed a second to process what I was seeing. Then my heart started pounding. Karen was outside my house. Dressed in dark clothing, she was crouched next to my power meter, fiddling with something. I sat up straight. What the hell was she doing? Then it hit me. She was trying to shut off my power. I grabbed my car keys, phone, and a baseball bat and stormed outside. Karen was so focused on messing with my electrical panel that she didn't even hear me approach. What the hell do you think you're doing? I barked. She jumped so hard she nearly fell backward. Her face snapped toward me, her eyes wide with shock, then fury. You don't deserve this power, she hissed, pointing at my roof. You and your stupid solar panels have ruined this neighborhood. I let out a cold laugh. Karen, you just got kicked out of the HOA and failed to get me fined by the city. Now you're tampering with my power? That's criminal trespassing and vandalism. She ignored me and turned back to the meter. I'm just enforcing the real rules. The community. I took 2 steps forward, holding up my phone. Karen, this is all being recorded. Every neighbor has access to my security feed. She froze. Her eyes darted around like she was looking for an escape route. Then, as if realizing there was no way out, she did something insane. She grabbed a rock from my flower bed and threw it at me. I barely dodged in time. That was it. I dialed 911. Yeah, I need officers here immediately, I said, not taking my eyes off Karen as she backed away toward the street. Karen's face contorted in rage. You'll pay for this, she screeched. I'll make sure of it. Then she ran. Not toward her house, down the street. A few porch lights flicked on as neighbors peeked outside. Within 5 minutes, the police arrived. I showed them the security footage, the damage she caused, and explained everything that had led up to this moment. Karen was found hiding behind a neighbor's shed. The second she saw the cops, she started screaming. This is a misunderstanding. He's the criminal. But the officers weren't having it. They put her in handcuffs and read her rights. Trespassing, vandalism, attempted property damage. She was finally done. As the patrol car drove off, a few neighbors gathered outside. Mark shook his head. Never thought I'd see the day. Linda crossed her arms. Good riddance. I let out a long breath, finally feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. The next week, Karen's house went up for sale. She had no power, no control, and no reason to stay. As for me, my solar panels stayed up. And every time I looked at my electric bill, I smiled, knowing Karen was probably somewhere, still furious about it. That's the story of how I made my HOA president run her office on Candlelight before she ran herself out of the neighborhood. What do you think? Did she get what she deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had a crazy HOA experience, I want to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more insane HOA horror stories.